Hey guys, and welcome to this video about UiPath. In the previous videos, we quickly learned how to install and we talked about the user interface and we also created our first bot. And you might have seen this thing called sequence a couple of times now. I've used it a couple of times. But basically in this video, I want to talk to you guys about different way of structuring your application, right? And what we have to start off with are some kind of container. Like this, as you see here, sequence is a container. And we have three standard containers. One is called sequence, one is called flowchart, and one is called state machine. Now, the sequence is the easiest to work with. It basically goes from the top down to the bottom, does one thing at a time. And you will see this embedded in many other activities. It's one of the most used containers, and we are going to use it quite often. Now, there is a con with this sequence is basically there is no native ability to go back to a previous process step. Now there's workarounds around it. Maybe you could use retry scope and you can use try catch, but that's kind of partial workarounds. It's not a full-fledged workaround, so kind of a ugly fix, right? So I would say that's the biggest con of a sequence, but it isn't a con if you're actually using it the way it's intended, like code, right? It goes from the top and down to the bottom. And again, I am going to use this sequence a lot, but yeah, that's one of the three different, uh, let's call it project structure choices that you have or containers. I usually refer to these as containers because that's basically what it is, right? It's a container with a couple of or one too many steps inside of it. The next thing on the list is this thing called flowchart. And basically a flowchart is it's pretty easy to visualize the process flow because you can see how it goes, etc. And another pro with this is you can actually go back to a previous step. For example, you could reopen all the apps after a major error, right? And the biggest con with this, it's kind of a pain in the ass to work with. Well, it's different, right? Me personally, I prefer sequences, but yes, of course, there are some spots for a flowchart as well. And that's the number two of these three containers. And the third one is the state machine. But we're going to talk about the state machine a bit more in depth after I actually demonstrated the sequence and then the flowchart. So let's start with the basic demo, right? So the first thing we want to showcase is the sequence. So what we'll do is we'll take the sequence and we'll just drag it out here, right? And the sequence, if you want to change name on it, again, you just press here and you can give this sequence a cool name or something logical. A sequence of cool steps or something like that. I don't know, right? And then we can also add an annotation if you want, right? So like more information about this sequence. This sequence does stuff, whatever, right? And then we can press save here. And now we actually have the sequence over here. And again, basically what a sequence does is it does one thing, then the next thing, then the next thing, then the next thing. And to help you visualize it, I'm just going to drag and drop a click here. So we're just going to go click and then we actually have a click and well it wants us to choose the application, but from here we can copy paste this click and we can just you know do another one and do another one and do another one. So basically we'll do one click and another click and another click and another click. That's basically a sequence, right? It goes from top down to the bottom. Now I'm going to remove this and I'm going to also show you another thing. Now, just because you have a sequence, it doesn't mean that you cannot use a flow chart, right? If you want to have a sequence and then you want to have a flow chart inside of a sequence, you can do that. That's no problem. And you can also have a state machine, right? State machine. Like you can have this, you can have a state machine inside the sequence as well. And the same goes for flowchart. Inside a flowchart, you can have a sequence, and inside of a flowchart, you can have a state machine. It doesn't stop you, right? It's just how do you want to structure your work, right? And it all depends on what kind of robot or bot you are actually building. Now that's kind of it for sequence. And again, as I said before, like sequence is kind of used everywhere. Let's say, for example, if we'll do open browser, right? So we'll do open browser, use application browser. If I pull this in here, you see that what you will do is the first thing you will do is you will open a browser and then you will do something. So sequence is kind of embedded in many activities, not all. So UiPath is kind of inconsistent that way. Like some things will actually have this and some activities won't. And in some activities you're thinking why this should have a do because well, for example, if else, because if this then do that, else do that, but that one actually doesn't have the do activity in it, but you can always just copy it, right, and just paste it if you want, whatever. So you can do a lot of things with sequence, and through this course I will most likely be using sequence because again I find it the most easy to work with, and also I get a lot of stuff done with this. You don't need to do highly advanced stuff, and if you do, we can also get around it by using this sequence. The biggest con again is kind of you cannot go back into a step, but you can just, there's workarounds and you can just create a new step that is whatever you wanted to do in the previous step. So yeah, that's kind of it for sequences, and this is the container I will use the most. All right, so let's talk about the flowchart, right? So what you want to do is you want to add the flowchart to your main, and what you'll do is just search for this activity. So we'll go flowchart over here, and we'll just grab this little guy and we'll drag it out here. Now, the first thing is we have this, right? It's kind of not expanded or collapsed. So if you want to expand it, you press here and you get this view, right? And as I said before, like this is very good to visualize stuff, like how the flow will go, etc. So let's say, for example, we'll put three sequences here. So we'll do sequence, boom, and I'll just copy, paste, paste. Okay, so we have three sequences here. And we can change the name of this sequence to start sequence, and we'll just do mid sequence, and then we'll just call this end sequence, right? So the way it works in a flowchart is that you have this play button, and if you hover over the play button, you see you get three dots, right? Or four dots, excuse me, anchor points, right? And what you can do is you can actually press here and just drag it to wherever you want it to be. So if I do this, then if I press play, now this is the first sequence that will get launched, right? And after that's done, I can go from here to here and from here to here, for example. Now this looks like a sequence container, right? But you can also do some more advanced things. For example, let's say if we can also move this button over here, like so. If you want to do that, we can remove these lines by pressing the line and just go delete, for example. And we can go like so. And then we can also remove this like so. Remove that. Let's say we want to go from the start to the end. Why would we want to do that? I don't know. And then from here to here, for example. So you see, it's much easier to visualize the actual flow if you have a complicated workflow, right? And another thing you can do with the flow chart is the following. So let's remove these, for example, and we're just gonna move this a bit down here, and we'll put this one here, and like so, right? So we have a start sequence, right? And then we have a mid sequence, and let's say something went wrong. Something went wrong, or we want to make some kind of decision. We can actually add something called flow decision, right? So we have this flow decision and we'll just put it down here. So now we have a flow decision, right? And this flow decision could have a true or false. And we could say, for example, we put this one there. And if true, like if something went wrong, what we want to do is we want to take, one moment. So yeah, so let's say something went wrong, right? Then we can say, well, if something went wrong, then go back to the start, right? And if something didn't go wrong, well, then you can end the sequence for example. So if something went wrong, true, you see true here, go back to the start and start over. And if nothing went wrong, let's say you got the data you expected, yada yada, then you just go, it's false, and then we will end the sequence. Now, the reason I don't like the flowchart is basically in the sequence, right? It was pretty easy to drag and drop activities. Let's say I want to use a click, for example. So I press click here, and I take this click and I want to put it in the first sequence. I cannot drag and drop it. I cannot do anything with this sequence. So in order for me to actually play around with the sequence, I have to double click it, and now I am in this sequence. And here I can do click, and then we can do one more click, one more click, one more click. Now, if I go back to the main flowchart, so you see here I have like a tree, I have the main sequence, flowchart, and start sequence. If I go back here, now I can see that this sequence, let's see, we go flowchart here. We can see that it has some things in it, right? And we have an error here, yada yada. But it's not very detailed. So me personally, I don't like this just because, well, it's not as straightforward. And it's really good if you have business people and you need to help them visualize how everything goes, yada yada. But to create an actual bot, I prefer the sequence container much more. And yeah, so that's kind of a flowchart. Feel free to play around with the flowchart and try different stuff because again, that's the best way to learn different things. And these are the two main container or project structures I will use. Well, I will mostly use the sequence, but there is also this flowchart that we might combine or use to do some things, right? Some people will love the flowchart, some people will prefer the sequence. And then we have the state machine, but state machine we're going to talk about way down the line in this course. And yeah, that's kind of it for this video, guys. Again, I'm trying to keep this video short, and if you enjoyed the content, please do a thumbs up, and yeah, don't forget to subscribe, guys. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for this video, and in the next video, we're actually going to create something and talk about a bit more about UiPath and the cool stuff we can do with this. Bye for now. Bye bye.